This is Jenny Larson conducting technically my third interview with Tiffany Seaward as part of the Conversations to Create Unity Oral Histories project with the Susanna Dickinson Museum and Baylor University. Hi, Tiffany.
Hello.
So let's get started with you telling me about your early years, where you were born, when you were born, those sort of formative beginning.
Okay, I was born in Austin, Texas in 1981. I grew up in South Austin and North Austin. South Austin, we had what I would call a family home. It was my grandparents' home, but anyone in the family was welcome to live there. That was in South Austin, off of South 3rd Street. I have a lot of fond memories there. I also lived in North Austin with my mother and my stepfather. It was in the Crestview neighborhood. We lived on Brentwood Street, and we lived on Ruth Avenue. I guess I spent most of my time with my mom. So I went to school at Brentwood Elementary, and on the weekends I would go to my grandparents' house with my dad. We attended the Hornsby Bend Assembly of God Church. It's out towards Hornsby Bend, towards Del Valley. And for middle school, I went to Lamar Middle School. We moved from Ruth Avenue over to kind of the Runberg, Rutherford area. There's a nice little neighborhood. It's like a gym in Austin, which Austin is known for. When you drive around, you'll find little areas that you didn't know existed. This is one of those neighborhoods. So I lived there, kept attending Lamar, and then from there I was on a transfer. I went to McCallum. Went to McCallum for 9th grade and 10th grade. Then I moved in with my aunt and uncle in far South Austin, which used to be to us out of town. It was like a trip to go this far. At the end of Manchac Road in the Twin Creeks neighborhood. And so I was bused to Bowie. I rode the bus to Bowie, and I attended Bowie my junior and senior year, graduated from Bowie. So that's kind of a rundown in a nutshell of, where I was in my childhood as far as locations in Austin.
So talk to me more about the elementary school years and the Brentwood, Ruth Avenue, Crestview neighborhood.
Okay, I have a lot of fond memories of that neighborhood. It was a quiet neighborhood. I would say medium-sized houses, older homes. It was the type of neighborhood where everyone rode their bicycles. We were always at the park. Everyone knew everyone. You knew your neighbors. Walked to school every day. Just a fun little neighborhood. There was a grocery store called Mini Max. We always shopped there. There were a couple little shops in the area next to the store. It was just a quiet, simple neighborhood. It was pretty much medium to low income families. Anyone could find a home in that neighborhood. You could have money and find a home, or you could be poor and find a home. There was space for everyone. And in that neighborhood, like I said earlier in Austin, there's a lot of nooks and little hidden places, little hidden houses and lofts and apartments and duplexes that you could find affordable housing in. So it was a mixed income area. It was predominantly whites. There were some Latinos, not too many African Americans. It was just a quiet, simple neighborhood. There wasn't a lot of crime. I don't remember a lot of crime. It was just working people, working folks.
So, you talked a little bit about the demographics of the neighborhood. What about your school?
My school, Brentwood School, was predominantly white. I remember having 2 African American classmates, and there were Latinos, maybe 20%. But it was predominantly white, middle, low income families. A lot of low income families. So that was kind of the demographic of elementary. It changed a lot in middle school, even though I just went down the street. The mixture of cultures and races changed. There was a mixture. At Brentwood, there really wasn't. But at Lamar, there definitely was.
That's a good segue. So in moving into middle school, which you lived in a lot of different pockets of neighborhoods around the city.
Yeah.
So after you left the Crestview neighborhood,
Yes.
Talk to me about that sort of the middle school years now.
Okay, so the middle school years, I was living off of Rutherford and Rumberg area, but I was still attending Lamar, so my parents would drive me over, because at that time, the Rutherford area, even though we lived in a nice neighborhood, it was still kind of a rough area of town. So I continued going to Lamar. Lamar was probably a third Latino, a third black, and a third white. A lot of people were bussed in to Lamar. It feels like half the school might have been bussed in, looking back on it. The neighborhood where Lamar is a nice neighborhood. It's wealthy individuals. So you had the people from the neighborhood that went to Lamar. Then you had people in the Crestview area that went to Lamar, but they didn't have the high income as the kids that were right next to the school did, or their families did. And then you had primarily Latinos and African Americans were bussed over to the school. So it was just a mixture of all different types of people.
And how did so how was that? How did the kids get along?
Well, I think it was challenging for a lot of kids. It seemed, well, for one, we were moving into middle school, so there's hormones, there's that whole dynamic. Another part is you're being introduced to a lot of kids you don't know. And then another part is half the school or more is being bussed into a neighborhood that's really far away from their houses. So, I mean, looking back on it, to me, it felt like a hostile environment. I know that might be a little harsh, but I remember fights were the norm. There was even a lockdown at our school because the Latinos and the blacks were going to have a big, fight. And so everyone was locked down, no backpacks at school, everyone had to walk in straight lines. And this went on for a few days until the situation diffused. I really felt there was tension. There was definite tension. I don't know what the atmosphere is like now, 20 years later, since Austin's changed so much. Maybe there's a different vibe there. But at that time, honestly, it was kind of scary from my perspective.
So one thing that I've been asking a lot of our interviewees is if they remember a specific incident where they suddenly realized that cultural differences or racial differences were a thing. And I wonder if there's a moment for you that there was a realization that, and that maybe is too big or hard a question to ask, but like maybe your first encounter of witnessing racism or any of those moments?
Okay, let me think about this. I mean, I definitely came to the realization that there was racial tension in middle school because I was pretty much always called white girl, and that wasn't a good thing. I did have friends of all races, and I did have people that didn't like me from all different races. I was pretty shy, quiet, kind of like a nerd type, kind of stayed under the radar, so I guess I was an easy target. And we were in middle school, so naturally people, like to pick at others. I can't remember anything specific right now. If something does pop into my head, we can touch back on this. I do remember a very violent fight That was my first fight I'd ever seen in my life that happened at my school. And it was an African American and a white person. And I don't know if it was racially charged, but it was very violent and it was really scary. I was in 6th grade and I almost I was on the verge of tears, just like, whoa, I've never seen anything like this. And it was never said that it was racial. I really don't know what the dynamics were behind it, but that was my first encounter with something so intense.
That sounds intense. So the middle school was very diverse.
Yes.
What about the Runberg and Rutherford neighborhoods itself? What was that demographic? That
was diverse, actually. The neighborhood I lived in is a little pocket that's just hidden, that has really nice houses. It's a mixture of all races. Anyone could live there and anyone could afford it. You could get something nice. We actually got a HUD home. It was my mom's first time purchasing a home. So there was some deal, if you purchased a HUD home, you would get, I think, a discount, or you didn't have to pay the down payment, some incentive. So that's how we got into that neighborhood. It was diverse. It had blacks, whites, and some Latinos. I think it was mostly blacks and whites. Now, the surrounding area around that neighborhood was predominantly black and Hispanic. If you go down Runberg and Cameron Road.
So now take me into high school. You went to McCallum and then Bowie?
Yes.
So talk about McCallum and what that experience and demographics, and then talk about Bowie and what that was like.
Okay. McCallum was very diverse as well, just as diverse as Lamar. To me, it was calmer. Everyone had matured a little bit. Everyone was more integrated. Whereas at Lamar, it's just the way it was. The blacks sat with the blacks, the Latinos with the Latinos, the whites with the whites. Some mingled. We went to different tables and talked and stuff, but it was definitely segregated by choice. People just went with who they already knew from their neighborhoods. So that kind of segregated people. At McCallum, yes, people went with who they knew from their neighborhood. So naturally, you're going to gravitate to the people that live in your neighborhood, which might be of, the same race as you. But there was more inclusion. People were more friendly in general and getting along and hanging out with each other. I liked it there. It was a good vibe. It was a happy vibe there.
And how about Bowie?
Bowie, definitely predominantly white. There were, from what I remember, there were not very many African Americans at all. There were Latinos, not that many. A lot of my friends were bussed in from Meadowbrook's projects, and I'm still friends with them today. And I lived close to them on South 3rd Street. That's where my grandparents' home was, our family home was. But quite a few of my friends were bussed in from Meadowbrook's, and I'm not sure other places that were bussed in that were so far away from the school. It doesn't make any sense, but that's just the way it was. It might still be. But Bowie is predominantly white. Definitely.
And you said you lived around the Manchac and Twin Creek area?
Yes.
So what was that neighborhood like?
That neighborhood was predominantly white. Predominantly white. It's an old neighborhood. People have bigger plots of land. The houses are spaced out. It has more of now it's changing. It had more of a out of town. You'd see horses, you'd see some cows, that kind of feel. There weren't a lot of city lights or businesses. It was just kind of on the outskirts. And when we would actually go there, when I was a child, when we would go to Twin Creeks, that's where my aunt and uncle have a home. That's who I lived with when I went to Bowie. Well, when I was a child, we would go there for holidays. my uncle would come and pick us all up. I mean, the whole family, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, in his van. We'd all get in his van because we were going on a trip. And all we were going, like looking at it now and the way Austin's changed, it's like we weren't going that far. But the way Austin was back then, going from South First and Altorf all the way to Manchac in 1626, you were really going somewhere. You were going out of town. It was an all-day adventure. And so everyone had to load up. And we really thought we were in the car forever. Now it's nothing to just zip, zip, zip all around. I mean, you're in traffic, but now looking at it, it's driving there is nothing. It's nothing like it was back then. Back then, we just felt like we were really going somewhere. We were going out of town.
So to follow sort of the same trail that we're going down, I wonder if you can speak now to all of these neighborhoods and without going one by one, but thinking about them in a broader term, Crestview, Runberg, Twin Creeks, how have these neighborhoods changed? And thinking about it, economics also in terms of racial demographics.
Okay. Well, definitely the price of living in the neighborhoods has gone up. The cost of the houses has definitely increased. A lot of the neighborhoods have been revamped, remodeled, houses torn down. They don't look the same. When I go back to my grandparents' house, I just want to cry. I do not recognize my neighborhood that I grew up in. And it hurts. It really hurts to know that I cannot afford to live in the house, in a neighborhood where I grew up. I can't buy a house in the neighborhood I grew up in. They are millions of dollars now. So definitely the prices of the homes have gone up. Definitely the minorities living in the neighborhoods have gone down. In South Austin, it used to be primarily Latino and older whites, homeowners. And the rental properties were more of those little eclectic, tucked away things that, bachelors could live in. But the homes were mostly homeowners, Latino families. And when you go to the Zilker area, when you go to Bowden Creek, they're gone. And if they're still there, they're barely hanging on. It's a family home. The taxes have gone up so much, it's making it hard on families to stay in their homes. I see it with my family so much. All of my cousins were late 20s, early 30s, and we're at this time where we want to buy homes, or they want to buy homes, and we're all coming to this realization that we can't afford homes in the neighborhoods we grew up in. Our kids are not going to be able to go to the schools that we went to unless we really, really, really try hard to get transfers, to drive in traffic, and jump through different hoops to try to make it happen. But back to your question, the way that I've seen the neighborhoods change, the cost of living, the pricing of the homes, a lot of neighborhoods changing because houses are being torn down and rebuilt, and less minorities. This neighborhood we're living in is 80% Latino and maybe 8% white and maybe 2% African American. I'm just making, a guesstimate off of what I see on a daily basis. Now I'm seeing a lot more African Americans. That's showing that they're having to move from where they were, because a lot of African Americans historically have stayed in East Austin or North Austin. And now this neighborhood is one last stronghold of a place where you can find maybe somewhere to live that's not too expensive. And I'm seeing more African Americans moving over here. I'm also seeing more whites moving over here, young whites with young kids. And so this neighborhood is changing like that. Race is changing. it's just changing everywhere you turn in Austin.
So I wonder if I can ask you to speak more about the changing of the East Side, because as you know, as a Austin native, it was historically segregated for a very long time. And it was during your lifetime that started to shift. And I wonder if you can just speak to what you've witnessed in terms of that specific change in Austin.
Well, I don't get to the East Side as much as I used to when I was a child. We did go to the East Side quite often because my parents had friends in East Austin. A lot of friends that they worked with, because historically in East Austin, there have not been a lot of opportunities for employment. So a lot of people would have to come into Austin and work for the state or restaurants, wherever. They would come into other parts of Austin to work, and my parents would make friends with them, and so we would go to East Austin. And when I was a child, East Austin was predominantly, from what I observed, African American and Latinos. There weren't a lot of businesses unless they were local, restaurants, tire shops, hair, barbershops, things like that. Little knick-knack stores, stuff like that you would see in East Austin. More unique little shops. Now when I go to East Austin, I don't recognize it. I'm totally shocked when I go to East Austin. Honestly, when white people started moving to East Austin as a local and my family, we couldn't believe it, because it was never like that. It just wasn't. That's just the way it was. Latinos and blacks lived in East Austin, and that was their part of town. I don't know I didn't know much about it unless we went to visit. And that's just the way it was. So now when I go over there, I just feel sad sometimes. I feel happy because I do embrace some of the changes that are happening in Austin. It is safer. It is cleaner. What makes me sad is that I know there are families that have been in East Austin established with their family homes, and there's generations, and the families are getting broken apart because maybe grandma has a house and it's paid for, but maybe her kids and her grandkids were renters and they didn't get in to buy a home before Austin had this huge boom. And so they may have to move farther away from grandma and family. And it makes it more challenging, especially when children are involved, because a lot of people in my family depend on grandmas and aunts to take care of our children when we're at work. And if we can't afford to live in the neighborhoods that they live in, then we have to move far away and drive into town to drop our children off, or pay $600 or $700 a month in childcare. And so it's distancing families. And I'm just assuming from what's happening in my family that is probably happening in East Austin, because there was a time when poor people could have a home and pay for it. And now that just seems really, really hard to obtain for someone who doesn't have a lot of money. It feels like we're being pushed out of our hometown.
So, thinking about or listening to talk about the segregation on a city level, and then thinking about how you talked about Lamar Middle School and how the kids would self-segregate at lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if this sort of this separation that has historically been a part of Austin, do you see that changing at all, or and how, if it's changing?
That's a good question. In some ways, I see it changing because people that are moving here that are predominantly white and have money are more willing to go to the east side and buy property. So they're more willing to step into that neighborhood that was once not desirable. And they're willing to put themselves in a neighborhood that is predominantly, or was predominantly, Latino and Black. So that is one way that, the races are mixing and coming together. However, that said, a lot of the Blacks and Latinos are being forced out of their homes. And so they have to go to the outskirts, Round Rock, Del Valley, Buda, Leander, Pflugerville. So in that sense, it's becoming more segregated. It's like they took the part of town that low-income people could live in. This is beyond race. This is just low-income people, working people, people that had a job, 40 hours or plus a week. They took the places that they could live and they made whoever, I don't know, special interests, corporations, normal people, combination, have taken those properties and either demolished them, put up condos, renovated them to the extent where they are overpriced for the average working person. And so that is creating segregation. And it's creating some hostility, I will say, because to be in your neighborhood your whole life and your mom was and dad was raised in that neighborhood and your grandparents were, to be pushed out of it, it really hurts. And to have something that you have seen, a piece of artwork, a field of grass and trees that has been there your whole life, your dad's whole life, your grandparents' whole life, to just be demolished with no respect or no regard that there's history there. Because someone else from another state or a special interest group or developers, they wanted that property and they were going to take it, and they don't care how anyone else feels about it because they're going to make their money. And that really hurts. I'm all for change. I love a lot of the beautiful things that have come along with the changes in Austin. But enough is enough. It's just becoming way too much development. And it's scary. I worry about my children. Where are they going to live? If they're not a millionaire, where are they going to live? They're going to have to move away from me and their grandma and their great-grandma and their grandpas. And it just hurts. It hurts.
So I think and listening to, I think, okay, so then what do we do? And that is a good segue to my next question, which it's not so much about now what do we do, but it's about if you have any experience of activism and what that might be in Austin in any capacity.
Well, the activism that I have done was for my daughter's school at Zilker Elementary. Hometown school. My dad went to Zilker Elementary. My grandma was on the PTA, walked to school. Everybody went there. And so I got my children on a transfer so they could go there. Because let me just say one thing. Austin's changed, but the school system has not. That is outdated, and that is one thing that has not changed. So it's safer for me to put my children in a different neighborhood. That's just the facts. So my children were on a transfer to Zilker, and a few years ago, there was an uproar. There's not enough money to fund schools, and Zilker's going to close down. Well, all the parents rallied together because we all know each other, and we all walk our children to class and talk to each other and communicate and have a really wonderful environment there. And for the state to come and say they're going to close our school, that was just unacceptable because we are doing everything we can to make sure our children get the best education they can, have great friends, and know all these great adults and parents in the community. So everyone rallied together and they didn't close the school. which I don't think they really intended to close in the first place. They just used that school because they knew all the parents were going to have an uproar. But if they try to close one in a low-income area where the parents are at work, they're not going to get as much resistance. So they have to go up against one of the schools where they know they're going to get resistance. And then they can back down, and then they can sideline and close one of these schools that's low-performing or whatever they want to say. But that's been some of my activism in Austin. I'm not really sure what to do about what's going on. It seems so much bigger. Everywhere I turn, there's a new condo, there's a new store, restaurant, something's going up. It almost feels overwhelming.
And thinking about how you're talked about this disparity in which schools they're going to close, and these sort of the officials knowing very well the disparities and using that to their advantage just makes me think of like authority in general and how authority can manipulate situations. And so I wonder if you might be able to speak to me about law enforcement in Austin, and if you have any stories about interactions with law enforcement that happened to you personally, or something that you've witnessed personally where race or economics and those disparities played in.
Well, I'm trying to think of something that I can say. That can
Fair.
be recorded. For me, honestly, I'm a white girl in America. There's just... I have not been discriminated against by the APD, and that is probably because I'm a white girl in America. And that's just the way it is here in America. My stepfather is Hispanic. He's Latino. He's from the Valley. He has been discriminated against. And I remember as a child, him being discriminated against, him being bullied, us being pulled over in the vehicle, and him, saying, like him being very frightened whenever there was a Latino on the news who was wanted for something. Him being like, oh God, they're going to come after me because, I'm dark-skinned. And it was always something that was on his mind. I don't really recall too many other incidents. I mean, I've definitely heard about them. My dad had a lot of African-American friends, male friends, and it definitely was a topic of conversation that I overheard during my childhood. That is for sure. But I can't think of any specifics. Can't think of any specific incidents.
So, do you have any other personal experiences or anything that have specifically to do with race and segregation in Austin?
I really don't have anything to add to it. I know that Austin, my entire life, up until recently, has been segregated. Still is segregated. Do you think it's changing rapidly?
I'm sorry, I should have let you keep going.
It's okay.
Do you think it's changing for your daughters?
Definitely.
Talk more to that.
Definitely. For instance, our neighborhood school, in this neighborhood, our middle school, my mother attended it. It was predominantly white. Now, it is 80% Latino, 10% white, 10% black. So this neighborhood has changed. This neighborhood is predominantly Latino, and a lot of homeowners here. one way it's changed is that my daughters are both attending the Ann Richards Girls' School. It is very diverse there. There are girls from all over the city. Every race in the city. So it's very diverse there. And I do applaud Austin for adding that school and giving parents an option to look at something different and give their children opportunities. I really sincerely hope that they add a boys' school that has the rigor that the Ann Richards School does, so that other families can have that option as well. I feel that my daughters are not, even they're in a great school, so they are exposed to a lot of different cultures. However, I really feel like what I'm seeing in Austin is that Austin is becoming predominantly white. And when I was a child, it wasn't like that. And when I walked around the neighborhoods, I rode the city bus everywhere when I was a kid. We didn't have a car. We did not have a car. And there was just races all over, all types of people. And so you get more of a real experience of people's lives, what people go through, just talking to them on the bus, just talking to them at a coffee shop, just walking around. I feel that when I look around at South Congress, Lamar, places that I went all over, walked up and down those streets so many times, when I look at them now, I can really see that my children are going to be interacting with people of a different socioeconomic status than them, as far as people with a lot more wealth. It just feels as though Austin is getting a much more preppy vibe, and that's not what I grew up with. I grew up with casual, friendly, easygoing. Yes, there was crime. Yes, there was questionable activities on Congress and such. But there was also a lot of laughter, happiness, fun, music, art, spontaneity, all these things that people they're coming to Austin for. They're clamoring for all these things, keep it weird and all that stuff. They're getting here and they're changing it into something that local Austinites don't recognize. I don't feel welcome in my city sometimes. I don't fit in. All my little shops, I call them my shops because that's where I went to as a kid and an adolescent. They're bulldozing them down, and it makes me sad. My kids aren't going to have those opportunities to go to those little places. It just seems like it's becoming way too trendy, way too overpriced.
You've sort of already been speaking to my next point, which is just, what is your life like now and how has Austin changed?
Yeah.
So I actually feel like I just have one last question, which feel free to, talk on it as much as you'd like. But is there, thinking about this as like, this is your chance to tell history. And if you don't tell it, somebody else will. And with that in mind, is there anything that you want to make sure that we do record?
I want people to know that Austin was built by hardworking families, and that there was a time in Austin's history when you could be a hard worker and you could have something. You could have a home, you could have a car, you could have a decent life. As long as you went to work 40 hours a week, you could have that. My family worked for the city, the university, the state. Yeah, they were just workers. They were welders, cooks, mechanics. But they had a house. They bought it. They had a car. They paid for it. They had pretty nice things. And it was theirs that they paid for. And they could do that just by working 40 hours a week. And it just seems like that's not obtainable anymore. Seems like you can work 40 hours a week, but if you make under $20 an hour in Austin, you're going to struggle. That's what I see. That's what I see in my friends and my family. And I just want people to remember that everyone's life is valuable and that everyone needs a place to live. And that we need to preserve and make room for these hardworking people and families and their children and grandchildren so that they can have a home. Because realistically, these people that are moving here with a lot of wealth, they're depending on some of these people, these hardworking people, they're depending on them to run their households and to take care of their homes and to clean up their businesses and to do these sort of jobs that they don't want to look at. But there's someone there to do the job, and we need to make sure they have a place to live and not push them out.
Awesome. Thank you,
Okay.
Tiffany.
Thank you.
Tiffany.
Thank you.
Tiffany.